1.
Hi, my name is Nikki Harris, and I'm going to report to you on my project that was titled Communication in Workplace Discord. So I want to tell you what I looked at. Basically what I looked at was at my workplace, which is the Nebraska Humane Society. I looked at the 2009 and 2010 workplace climate studies. I also looked at a union vote that we had here. I interviewed some employees that were previously in unions, and then I also I'm going to tell you about some recommended improvements that I put into my project. So who did I look at? Well, I looked at the Nebraska Humane Society, which is where I work. We are a unique shelter in that we do animal control and adoptions. Not very many shelters around the country do that. Because of that, we're a very large organization of about 30,000 people, or 30,000 animals come through our doors each year. We have 130 staff members and we have 500 volunteers, so it's a pretty large organization. So how did we deploy these surveys? Well, both years they were deployed online. Both times it was the same survey. They were 30 questions each. The last question was an open-ended question asking for suggestions and ideas. Both times, in 2009 and 2010, the results of the surveys were reported to both the administration staff, which is vice presidents and our president, and then supervisors. So the other thing I looked at was the union vote. We had, shortly after the 2010 survey was reported, the results were reported and some of them were pretty negative. Department organized enough people to form a vote to possibly vote in a union to their department. They had to get at least 12 votes to bring in the union vote. So there were two votes, the initial vote and then the second vote, which was to bring in the union to represent that department. They were able to get the second vote in, but it did not pass. So not enough people voted to be represented by the union, but I did think it was perhaps a symptom of us not making changes when the results of the survey were reported to us in 2010. So for this project I did some literature review. I primarily focused on nonprofit organizations and their uniqueness of them in the business world. One of the studies that I found stated that it's pretty common in nonprofits for managers to not have training because there's very little money to send people to trainings. Also in nonprofits, the emotion of the work creates a culture that's very unique for each different nonprofit. The other thing I found is that when you have fairness and satisfaction in the workplace, you have job satisfaction. If employees don't feel that they're being treated fairly, then you're not going to have high job satisfaction. So I wanted to tell you about the methodology and the design of the surveys and how I addressed the ethical concerns for both the surveys and the interviews. For the ethical concerns for the surveys, we addressed those by, we did ask the people on the surveys the department name, but it was optional to give it. They could still complete the survey without putting in their department name. And when I did my project, I did not identify any departments based on their responses. For the interviews, I got the names of the people to interview from our human resource department, and I interviewed the people. When I interviewed them, I told them what I was working on. I told them their name would not be used, and I told them who would be seeing and hearing about their responses. So they're not identified at all in the project. I looked at two questions on the survey, the online survey. The first one was management communicates its goals and strategies effectively, and the second one is there is good coordination between departments at NHS. So both of these questions were asked, and then the employees were asked to rate on a Likert scale from 5 to 1, 5 being strongly agree and 1 being all the way down to strongly disagree. So again, the first question I looked at was management communicates its goals and strategies effectively. In 2009, almost 50% of the respondents said that they strongly agreed. That same number dropped to about 15 in 2010, so that's a huge drop. And that's definitely should have been a red flag for all of us in a supervisor position. The next question that I looked at is there is good coordination between departments at NHS. Again, in that one, there were 38% of the respondents agreed with that in 2009, and then that dropped down to 30% in 2010. And again, I just think that that is a really important thing to look at as a supervisor. we didn't really look at that as supervisors. It was reported to us, and no changes were made organization-wide. Some departments did make changes, but none were made organization-wide at that time. So then shortly after that is when the union vote came into place. The other part of my project is I did interview people that had worked in unions, and the legal department would not let me interview anyone here about unions at NHS. I could only ask about their past union experience. So I did find 5 people that were members of unions, everything from a police department to other shelters in other states to UPS. So kind of the wide variety of people that had been in unions. I did find that almost across the board they all agreed that unions are for larger organizations, not for small organizations like ours. And then the last question I asked all 5 of the people was, did you see any changes in your department as a result of the work climate survey? Only 2 of the 5 people said yes, that they did see changes right away. So I just wanted another example of the proof that changes were not made right away. Shortly after starting this project, changes were made because there was another report made by the supervisors to the administration staff about problems and concerns. So changes have been started to be made. I did have some other concerns that I wanted to address because there were some written comments that we didn't all get to hear at first in the open-ended question in the survey, the online survey. And here were some of the responses that I heard, or that I got to read. The level of cooperation between the departments needs to be improved. This was a open-ended response. This is with the response to that. We need to hire managers who actually know how to manage. That was another response that an employee made. And then as far as communication between the staff and the employees, there is none. So that's several different employees from several different departments that all spent the time to write out that there were communication problems. The administration staff has decided to take this very seriously. They are now addressing it in all of their department meetings. One of the things that I suggested was, one of my improvements was that we could use the experience of our VPs. Almost all of our VPs are in their 50s and had jobs and careers prior to coming here. So we could use their expertise to train us in other areas. Also, that would give us some exposure to some other vice presidents. Right now, I have very little exposure to other vice presidents, and they might have some strengths that they could work on with me, but we don't have that right now. But that would be an effective, inexpensive way to use our current staff, and that wouldn't cost much money. So in conclusion, would installing these changes that we're doing now, if we would have installed them right after the survey, would that have prevented the union vote? We'll never know, but I do believe that the union vote is a symptom of us not addressing ongoing problems. What should happen in 2011? I think in 2011 we really need to track these changes that we're making, and then we need to survey the staff again and find out if we've made improvements, find out if they can tell that we're trying harder, find out if the problems that they communicated to us earlier, if we're actually addressing them. And then I think that needs to be an ongoing survey. And then I really think that the supervisors and admin team need to be careful about monitoring changes and making sure that follow through is done, because that's also another common complaint. Thanks, and that's the end of my presentation.